We're going to go ahead and get started. Ben Gold and I, on behalf of NASPGHAN, want to welcome you to the first NASPGHAN Research Skills Workshop. Just on your way out, there's a sign-in sheet. So could you please sign it, just so it'll give us information on how to improve next year and where we can get feedback. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Harland Winter. Dr. Winter is an associate professor of pediatrics and director of the pediatric IBD program at Mass General Hospital for Children. He is a former president of NASPGHAN. During his tenure as president, he organized the Children's Digestive Health and Nutrition Foundation, which, as you know, is now known as the NASPGHAN Foundation, the First World Congress of Pediatric GI, Hepatology, and Nutrition in Boston, and was the chair of the first professional and public national education campaign on pediatric gastroesophageal reflux disease. Dr. Winter studies the relationship between the microbiome, genome, and host response in children with IBD. He has been involved in many industry and investigator-initiated clinical trials to evaluate medications used to treat children with reflux, constipation, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis, and he is extremely well published. We're honored to have him be our first speaker, and he will be talking about non-NIH sources of funding.
And Ben, thank you very much for asking me to do this talk. I wrestled a lot with how to prepare this discussion, because I think that in academics, when I was training, the NIH funding was considered to be something that was valued, and if you were doing clinical trials and if you were doing non-NIH funded, you were sort of a second-class citizen, and so it wasn't quite as prestigious to do that. And then the HIV epidemic came along, and there was a lot of money that was spent on NIH funding. But when you look at the results of what happened, that the advances that came with the medications and understanding the pathophysiology of the disease really came from non-NIH funding, and that's what really led to the discovery of treatment that we have today. I mean, certainly the NIH funding was important and played an important role in understanding pathogenesis, but it's really a combination of both NIH funding and non-NIH funding that advances the care of children. And so I'm going to give a little bit of a perspective of non-NIH funding, with the idea that, with the hope that that some of this information will be helpful for people when they consider what to do. So I have a number of consulting arrangements with different companies. Most of these arrangements are involved with helping people understand how to develop study design to meet the FDA regulations, which are in an evolving process, and I think an important one. And I would encourage all of you to get involved in thinking about clinical trials and helping our community deal with how to most appropriately study medications in children, because what usually happens is that medications get approved for adults, they then get used in children, and there are no data to really support the efficacy or the use in children. And I think that's a paradigm that we need to change over time. So in the next 20 minutes, I hope that I'm going to share with you some of my life lessons, as my children call them, life lessons, where to look for funding in terms of philanthropy, government funding, foundations, and industry. And I want, if anybody would like a copy of these slides, please send me an email, and I'm happy to send them to you if you think they'll be of use in terms of what you want to do. It's hwinter@mgh.harvard.edu, and I'm happy to send you the slides. I just want to say a word about philanthropy, because that's not something I'm going to talk about later on in the talk. But I think that philanthropy plays a really important part in helping us with initial initial studies, and sometimes patients are really grateful for the care that we provide for them, and they want to help advance the knowledge. And there are some parents who care not just about their own children's health, but they care about the health of all children that have that condition, and they really are interested in trying to make an impact in terms of how to improve the lives of many children. And I think that most institutions have mechanisms by which you can use this support to answer questions. And if in fact you're not studying this condition, and there are colleagues who are, I'd encourage you to share that resource. But that's an important resource, and I must say that it's helped me over the years in terms of parents who have come forward and said, I'd really like to help make a difference and to help understand this condition. So there's a website, clinicaltrials.gov, which is really a great resource in terms of understanding what studies are being done, because all the studies are listed there. And this is one example of a study that I took off the web of an anti-TNF agent that's being studied in children with ulcerative colitis. And you can also find out, if you want to find out about a yoga trial in ulcerative colitis, you also can find out about that's being done. So there's a wide range of information that's available on clinicaltrials.gov, and I think it's a good place to start in terms of learning about what trials are being done. Now, once these are published on the website, they're usually up and going studies. So if you have a center that's interested in participating, the horse has already left the barn in some sense. So it's may not help you in terms of getting involved. But oftentimes studies are slow in recruiting, and they want new centers to do that. So I would encourage you to contact the sponsors of the study and to ask them, how enrollment's going, if they need new sites, and if you can participate. So, in terms of non-NIH funding from the government, and I may have forgotten some things in terms of making this list. I did at the end of the slide, at the end of the talk, I have a list of people who I consulted with in terms of trying to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So you can blame me or you can blame them. So that's if I left something off. But the Office of Orphan Products, part of the FDA, is a great source of information, and Andrew Moberg, who's at the FDA and is a pediatric gastroenterologist, was very helpful in helping in guiding me and getting some information. This is a very special time at the FDA for us, because I can remember 20 years ago speaking to the FDA about the special needs of children in terms of drug development, and I can remember the individual who was in charge of the FDA saying to me, "Well, Harland, if we study children, then why shouldn't we study people who have blue eyes or people who have brown hair?" He said that was their analogy. Is that children were an exception, but there were lots of exceptions, and the NIH couldn't study all those exceptions. And it used to be when the FDA was formed through some amendments through Congress, the requirements were for 300 individuals to have to be participate in 2 placebo-controlled trials, and they were men. I mean, women were not. It was considered, not appropriate to enroll women in studies. So most of the studies, like thalidomide, were studied in men, and there were great drugs in men, but they were not very good drugs in women. And so there was this paternalistic attitude that, that slowly evolved in terms of women's health issues, but it was much slower to come in terms of pediatric issues. But now I think there are 3 individuals who are pediatric gastroenterologists who are at the FDA. And so we really have a voice in the FDA, and the FDA is evolving in terms of study design. And I must say that we as a community are not doing the best job in terms of relating to the FDA, and there's sort of a struggle going on between. This is unscripted, so this is going rogue here for a minute. But this is the issue is that our pediatric community has is setting up in a confrontational way with the FDA to saying, we're not going to do placebo-controlled trials in children. And so, there was a struggle about, well, we don't want to use patient-related outcomes, and so there was a controversy about that in terms of trials. Now it's in terms of placebo-controlled trials. I think that we as a community, if we're going to utilize the FDA and utilize our relationship, we need to find a way to, in a collegial way, work with the FDA to answer these questions, because the FDA has a requirement to maintain safety for these medications, and that's the same thing that we want to do. Now, how we achieve that is a matter of discussion, and I think that we all need to be open-minded about how we're going to do that. In pediatric IBD, is considered an orphan disease, and if a disease affects, or a condition affects less than 200,000 individuals in the United States, it's considered an orphan disease. And there are about 7,000 rare diseases and conditions according to the NIH, and there are about 30 million individuals in the country who have at least one of these rare conditions. So this is then, and a lot of these are children. The budget for the Orphan Products division was almost $15 million in 2003, and their pay line was about 15%, which is much better than the NIH at the present time. So there's a resource here that many of us should take advantage of. And Dr. Rao, who sent me this information and made this information available, is the director of the Orphan Products Development Division, and his telephone number is there on the slide, and his email address is too, and he'd be more than happy to speak to you or anybody about an interest in using the Orphan Products Division. Now, I've heard from industry. So if industry has there's a company that has a new product that they want to try to market in children, and it turns out that from industry's perspective, it's better to have an investigator who's not with the company to be the PI on the orphan product development, and because there's a relationship between the company and the investigators who are doing that. So I think that this is a source of potential revenue, but more importantly, it's a source. It's a chance to really increase drug development in children, to have drugs that are available for children, and not have to use drugs off-label. One of my favorite stories is about Alinea, which is a medication used to treat cryptosporidium and Giardia, and it was a medication that was formulated as a liquid. And so the company that Romark, who made Alinea, did two pivotal trials in Egypt, 300 children each, and showed efficacy. The FDA accepted the data. The medication was then approved for use in children, but not in adults, because they hadn't done adult studies. So for the first time, there was a medication that adult gastroenterologists and internists had to use off-label. They had to call and get a prior approval to use the medication in adults. And I pleaded with the company not to delay as long as they could the regulations in adults, because I thought it would be great if our adult colleagues could see what we have to go through with most medications and get prior approval. But it only lasted for about 6 months, and then they got the approval in adults, and they made in a tablet. But I think that there are medications that we can get approval for in children, and the orphan drug group is a good source. So there are many incentive programs for orphan product development, and they have funds for phase 1, 2, or 3 clinical trials, which evaluate drugs and devices and biologics and medical foods. One such medical food are probiotics. So there's one company, VSL3, has their product approved as a medical food, and this is an area that all of us should think about. I mean, if you have an idea about using a probiotic, you could go to that company and say, well, why don't we think about putting this into the FDA and applying for a grant, and if we can get these probiotics approved as medical foods, and then begin to put pressure on insurance companies to pay for it, it would be a great for our patients, because right now probiotics are very expensive for most people to purchase. The Orphan Product Development Group supports about 10% of orphan product approvals, and on February 4th of next year is the next receipt date for new and resubmitted applications for fiscal year 16. So if you have an idea about a product, please start working on it and talk to the FDA about how you can do that. If our community can generate more of these products that are approved for use in children, it will be great for our patients. And this is not just nationally, but I mean there are also a lot of us have connections with and relationships with colleagues in other countries, and it may be possible to structure a study where the patients can come from another country. So that would be also a good thing to do. The other thing that they told me was that there's increased funding this next year for the orphan products development. So they have more money to spend. So we should be more competitive in terms of trying to get that. You can get more information about the Orphan Product Program from these websites that were sent to me by by Dr. Rao, and I'd encourage you to go there and get more information. Well, there are other sources of non-NIH government funding. The Patient-Centered Outcomes Research has a specific focus on comparing clinical effectiveness, and they're interested in studies that compare outcomes to determine effectiveness, including risks and benefits of two or more approaches to healthcare. So if you're comparing two or more ways to do something, this is a possible source of funding. And they're interested in studies that improve available patient-centered research, and they're also interested in the development of large electronic data infrastructure studies that improve the conduct of patient-centered research. The conditions that they're interested in looking at are conditions that affect large numbers of individuals, and conditions that place a heavy burden on individuals and families and specific populations. That includes children and society. And they're also interested in rare diseases. So this is another opportunity for us as pediatric gastroenterologists to look at these questions. And they're interested in racial and ethnic minorities, in older adults, in low-income and rural populations, and in children. And the website is down there to get more information from PCORI. So some of the funding opportunities that are possible for PCORI, and you can see there's a lot of money that's been allocated by the government for these studies. Unfortunately, you only have until Election Day, November 4th. I hope you all vote this year to get these in. So there may not be time to do that, and a lot of these studies require the input from your institution, because you need to have people who are experienced in terms of putting these in. But you can see that there's a whole host of studies that they're available, and some of them, there's $90 million allocated for large pragmatic studies to evaluate patient-centered outcomes. And a lot of large institutions are doing this. And so there's an opportunity in your institution to find out who is doing this in terms of patient-centered outcomes, and talk to them about how you can be a part of that grant and of that process. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality also has grants. These grants are more structured like traditional NIH grants with R01s and different mentored research grants, but they're interested in in supporting research to improve the quality, effectiveness, and accessibility and cost effectiveness of healthcare. So again, some of these grants require economists and different people to collaborate with, but again, go back to your institutions, talk to people there who are possibly doing these kinds of things, and partner with them, and try to include children in the focus of what they're doing. So there are a number of foundations that provide support, and I probably have left some off, but. I just wanted to go through some of these just to give people an idea of what's available. Well, our own NASPGHAN Foundation has a number of grants. There's a Young Investigator Development Award. There's 3 of them. There's a Fellow to Faculty Transition Award, and there are different research awards that are sponsored by our own society that come from our own members who contribute to this, and through industry who contributes to this. So that's one source of getting funding in terms of starting a process. The AGA has a similar kind of foundation, and in fact, when we started the foundation, we modeled it somewhat after the AGA, with the idea that that foundation would really be a source of revenue and support for young people to get started on a career that's going to eventually, over their career, improve the lives of children who have digestive diseases. But the AGA has grants that our members have been very successful in getting. So they have about 15 grants. They have one on Microbiome Junior Investigator Award. They have Career Development Awards. They also have travel awards. So if that's part of a project you're doing, you can apply for that. So, I mean, I think that there are a number of resources at the AGA. The Gates Foundation is focused primarily on international health, and they're interested in vaccine delivery. But they have this Grand Challenges family of initiatives that are focused on innovation to solve key health and development problems for people who are in need. So if you have an idea about how you might improve the lives and the care of children in a developing country, or else even in the United States, I mean, we certainly have a need in this country to improve the lives of children who live in underserved areas. The grant gates are innovative and are related to improving the care of underserved populations, and I'd encourage you to look at their website to see what you can do, and partner with colleagues in other parts of the world who might be interested in doing this. The Kenneth Rainin Foundation is a foundation in Oakland. They support, for some reason, they support research in inflammatory bowel disease and in the arts. So they fund a lot of things in dance and music and jazz. So if you can think of some way to combine those things, you might have a double chance of getting funded. But they have an innovator awards program for IBD research that provides $100,000 for a 1-year proof of principal concept, and then if you're successful at that, they then have an award to continue that. They have an annual symposium that's usually open to everybody, and if you go to that symposium, you learn about what they want to fund, and you can get some ideas about whether you can put it in application. In 2014, these are the grants that they funded. So you can see that they're really interested in basic mechanistic aspects of inflammatory bowel disease. So if you're in a clinical setting, if you partner with somebody who's doing basic research, and you can convince that person who may be doing research in neurology or in some other field, you can bring them into the field of IBD by collaborating with them, and that's often a really important way to get involved in research. And it also brings new people into the field, which is really very important. The CCFA has a number of grants to help people get started on their career. They have senior research awards, which are about $100,000 a year for their 1 to 3 year grants. There are 2 application cycles a year in the spring and the fall. And these grants, again, are focused on IBD. They also have career development awards that support people who in the first 10 years after their I guess it's their doctoral degree, not your fellowship. And there's a salary of about $52,000 a year that goes to this. They have research fellowship awards, and they also have student research awards for students who want to do research. The Helmsley Foundation, Mrs. Helmsley left a lot of money for research and a lot for her dog, who I don't know if that dog is still alive or not, but the dog was well taken care of after she passed away. She had a very close relationship with that little dog, and so they fund a number of research projects. They fund areas. They fund research in two areas. One is in IBD, and they also have a project for development in Israel in terms of research. What they have funded is listed on this slide, and you can see that they funded a study on very early onset disease, an IBD network. They're very. I'm not sure how this works, but they also have chosen some institutions where they fund, and at Harvard, where I am, they've allocated funds that can be used only internally, and so we've applied for some of those funds and have been able to get some of those for pediatric gastroenterology, but they fund at Mount Sinai and at the Weizmann Institute as well, but they have a number of studies that you can apply for outside, and so I think that I would talk to them about ideas focused again on IBD. The Browd Medical Research Program has research grants, and what's nice about the Browd Foundation is there's no deadline for submission. So they have sort of a rolling submission, and the initial process is that you apply, you put together a 1 or 2 page really concept sheet, and you send it to them, and if they like the idea, then you can put in for a larger grant. And the grants get reviewed as they're submitted. There's no deadline that you have to meet. And you can see what they funded in 2014. They funded four projects. One of them is a controlled trial of an antibiotic treatment in adult Crohn's disease. They've also funded projects in pediatric IBD. Some of them are basic science, some of them are clinical. So there's a wide range of subjects. If you have a good idea, send the concept sheet to them and see what they think. The Doris Duke Foundation has a clinical scientist development award, which provides support to junior physicians to help transition from training into independent research career. And in 2014, they gave 17 grants ranging from Crohn's disease to pediatric movement disorder. So they have a wide range of interest in this, and each grant is about $425,000 per investigator. And since 1998, they have awarded 235 of these clinical science development awards for about $100 million. They do have a requirement that none of the experiments can use any animal tissues or products derived from animals will not be supported in the program. And what's today, the 24th? You got a week to get it in this year. So plan for next year. Oftentimes, I think you're only allowed one project per institution, so you might want to talk to your institution about doing this because they have to select somebody to apply for it. Autism Speaks has grants, and Suzanne and Bob Wright have raised a fair amount of funding for research. Again, there's no deadline for these. These are rolling grants, so you can submit them whenever you want. There's There's a $100,000 maximum up to 12 months, and they are interested in GI aspects of autism. The Autism Research Institute is a very small institute, and they give very small grants of around $20,000 to $25,000. It's a simple application. Again, there's no deadline. You just write to Stephen Edelson at the ARI and about what you want to do, and if they like the idea, they'll fund it. There's no major this is a real mom and pop organization, but if you have some idea that you want to get funded, you can talk to them. The Food Allergy Research Education has grants that are involved in food allergy, and their deadline is November 14th, so you have a couple of weeks to get a grant in if you want to. And they also have a biorepository, which may be of benefit to people who are doing research in food allergy. The International Foundation for Functional GI Disorders has grants as well. And the one thing that concerned me about this is that they sort of control some of the data. So I think that one needs to look at that. They fund small grants, and you can see who's been funded this past year. But you can see more on the website. The American Partnership for Eosinophilic Disease also has pilot grants, and their grants are about $50,000 a year for 2 years. And again, they're focused on eosinophilic related disease, so you can get that information. And then there are industry-sponsored grants, and all pharmaceutical companies really have grant applications. Some for research and some for education. But there are a number of pharmaceutical companies that have grants, and as I mentioned before, there are also trials that they do to get their drugs approved, and you can participate in that as well. And then the investigator-initiated grants I mentioned, these are usually short applications. Each company has them. If you have an interest in some project, you can contact the company and go to their website and see if they're interested in sponsoring it. So, what are the life lessons that I've learned? Well, have a good hypothesis. That's really critical. Under-promise and over-deliver. Finish what you start. Respect your colleagues, because this is a team sport. So I think that doing non-NIH funding research and clinical trials is really a team effort. And as one of my mentors, Judah Folkman, said, it's important you can do good work or you can take credit for it, but you can't do both. And although this is sort of a joke in some way, I mean, there's a certain element of truth to it. It's important to learn how to play well in the sandbox, because these are collaborative kinds of efforts. And how you accomplish your goal is really more important than what you accomplish. And I think that's something that I think is really important, that especially in doing these kinds of studies. So I really appreciate those who provided advice and input into some of the ideas in this talk. Dick Coletti and Dr. Gayatri from the NIH, from the FDA, and Andrew Mulberg, Ron Sokol, Barry Werschel, I think I spelled his name wrong, and Ron McXavier, and then Ben Gold was sent me a few emails about what to include in this talk. So I think as John McEnroe said, just stick out your racket, something might happen. That's good to do. So thank you very much.